They said I was too emotional to run a business, then handed me the CEO title in front of everyone. My hands were still shaking when Grandpa turned to me and said, "Congratulations, Grace. You won." For a second, the whole room froze. My uncles blinked like someone had just slapped them. My cousin Madison, the golden child, had her jaw wide open like she was choking on her own pride. And my mother, she didn't clap. She just stared at me like I had stolen something that was never meant to be mine. Before I reveal what happened. Next, make sure to subscribe, like, and share if you've ever been underestimated. This story will make you believe in silent power. 3 months ago, I was folding clothes at a small retail store in Ohio, with barely enough in my account to afford rent. Nobody knew I was spending my nights building something in silence. I'd come home at midnight, dead tired, and still open my laptop to work on a business proposal for the family's $5 million competition. See, every 5 years, the family runs a business challenge, and the winner gets full control of the next big venture. They treat it like a royal battle, and only the worthy are invited. Guess who was never even considered worthy until this year? Me, Grace. The fragile one, the too soft one. It all changed when Grandpa fell sick and said every grandchild had the right to compete this time. I saw my chance, but I didn't tell anyone. Not even my roommate. Not even my own mom. Madison, who had already interned at Google and opened her own startup with Dad's money, assumed she had it in the bag. She even called it a formality. I smiled and let her believe it. The day of the pitch, I stood there in front of 15 relatives, every one of them either silently smirking or openly texting while I spoke. My slides were clean, my idea was different, and I spoke straight from the heart. Still, no one clapped. Not one. Until Grandpa raised his hand and said, "This is the future. This is leadership." Now, suddenly, I wasn't the invisible girl anymore, I was the CEO of a project worth millions. But as I looked around that room filled with forced smiles and gritted teeth, something felt off. Almost like this wasn't a victory, it was a setup. And then, Madison stood up, walked toward me slowly, and whispered so only I could hear, "You have no idea what you just walked into." My heart skipped a beat. Madison's voice echoed in my head like a warning bell, but I couldn't afford to flinch, not in that room, not in front of them. I forced a smile, shook hands with Grandpa, and accepted the crisp folder labeled Ownership Transfer Documents. Cameras clicked. Applause, awkward and thin, bounced around the room like it was bouncing off stone walls. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just jealousy. It was intentional silence, the kind that hides something bigger. Later that night, while the rest of the family gathered for drinks and fake congratulations, I snuck away to read the documents. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The company they handed me wasn't the crown jewel I thought it was buried in $2.8 million in silent debt, with lawsuits pending and internal fraud under investigation. They didn't give me power, they handed me a ticking bomb. And the best part? My signature was already on the last page. My win wasn't a prize, it was a trap. I sat there alone in the cold library of Grandpa's mansion, stunned. They wanted me to fail. They wanted me to crash and burn publicly, while Madison and the others could watch and laugh. A nice little punishment for stepping out of the shadow they had comfortably placed me in since I was 12. It wasn't enough for them to ignore me, they needed me humiliated. But here's the thing they forgot, I wasn't the same Grace anymore. Over the last year, while everyone else was posting vacation photos and sipping cocktails, I was learning. Quietly. I had studied business litigation cases, corporate takeovers, startup rescue strategies. I had mentors online who didn't know my last name but taught me how to rebuild anything from scratch. My proposal didn't win because of luck, it won because I designed it to survive chaos. I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and began making calls. The first was to a forensic accountant I had followed on LinkedIn for months. The second was to a crisis PR manager. By sunrise, I had a war plan. If they wanted a downfall, I'd give them a documentary-worthy rise from ashes. And just when I thought I had control of the situation, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It simply read, "You're not the first person they've done this to. Meet me before it's too late." The message felt like a ghost from the past. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. Who else had they done this to? And why was no one talking about it? I hesitated only for a moment before replying, "Where?" Seconds later, a new message popped up with an address just 10 minutes from Grandpa's estate. It was risky, but I needed answers. So I grabbed my coat, snuck out through the side gate, and drove off into the foggy dawn, my mind spinning with fear, questions, and a strange hint of excitement. The address led me to a small, half-abandoned diner tucked behind a gas station. Inside, at a corner booth, sat a woman in her late 30s, sharp eyes, confident posture, like someone who had fought hard battles and didn't lose often. As I approached, she looked up and said, "Grace. I'm Amanda. I used to be where you are, until they buried me." She slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were old financial reports, court documents, and something that made my blood run cold, a photo of my Uncle Thomas shaking hands with a known fraudster who had disappeared after embezzling $1.4 million from one of our family's shell companies. Amanda explained everything. Years ago, she had been engaged to one of my cousins and was given control of a family venture. When she discovered financial crimes inside the company and refused to cover them up, they turned on her. Fast. They pinned everything on her, discredited her, and forced her to disappear. "I fought back," she said, "but I didn't have the leverage you do now. You've already won the public title. That's your weapon, use it." Suddenly, everything clicked. The staged competition, the cold smiles, the fake support, it was never about giving me a real shot. It was about creating a scapegoat for their mess. But now that Amanda had shown me the real web of lies, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dig up every skeleton they'd buried. I drove back to the estate with a storm in my chest. My plan was no longer about survival. It was about exposure. I cancelled the PR firm. I didn't want to fix the image. I wanted to show the truth. All of it. I started building a digital trail, documenting every piece of evidence Amanda gave me, adding my own discoveries, connecting names and money trails. I wasn't building a business now, I was building a case. The next morning, I called for a board meeting. My voice calm, my tone sharp. Everyone arrived, expecting damage control or, better yet, a tearful resignation. But instead, I stood at the head of the table, connected my laptop to the projector, and said 4 words that made Madison choke on her coffee: "Let me show you." I hit play. One by one, the secrets started pouring out. Fake vendors. Hidden accounts. Unauthorized bonuses. A whisper turned into a roar, and just when I was about to show the final file, the one that would drag Uncle Thomas straight into legal disaster, the screen went black. The room fell into panic, and then Grandpa stood up slowly, walked over to me, and whispered, "You need to stop this, Grace, before someone gets hurt." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Grandpa's words hung in the air like smoke, quiet, dangerous, impossible to ignore. I looked into his eyes, hoping to find some trace of the man who once cheered for my science fair project when no one else cared. But what I saw was fear, not for me, for the family legacy. For the empire built on lies. I stepped back, voice trembling but steady. "You want me to stop? After everything? After what they did to Amanda? After how they set me up?" I wasn't asking. I was daring him to say it out loud. But he just turned away, refusing to look at the mess he helped create. That's when I realized I couldn't rely on anyone in that room. Not even him. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. The board was shaken. Rumors flew. Madison started pushing the narrative that I was mentally unstable and emotionally overwhelmed. She went on social media dropping vague posts about family betrayal and unfit leadership. My mother didn't say a word. Not to defend me, not to check if I was okay. But the silence? It told me everything. So I doubled down. I leaked a portion of the evidence anonymously to a trusted journalist I had once served coffee to during my retail job. She remembered me. She listened. And she ran the story. By the end of the week, headlines were everywhere: family business scandal, hidden fraud and power games exposed by new CEO, Grace Monroe's silent rise. Now she's fighting back. That name, Grace Monroe, was finally being said with respect, not pity. And it wasn't just talk. Investors started calling. Former employees reached out, offering support and internal data I didn't even know existed. I was building something bigger than a comeback. I was becoming a force. But then came the real blow. A manila envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside were copies of emails, financial statements, and one shocking photo. It showed me, back in college, at a frat party. I was holding a red cup, blurry, mid-laugh, completely harmless. But stapled beside it was a fake HR complaint, claiming I was involved in substance abuse and hostile behavior at work. It was a desperate move. They were trying to destroy my credibility, to twist the truth and bury the real scandal under personal attacks. They wanted me scared, silenced, discredited, but I didn't come this far to back down now. So I did something no one expected. I held a live press conference. I walked on stage. In a plain black dress, no script, no teleprompter. Just truth. I admitted my past, owned my mistakes, and then turned to the screen behind me, where I displayed every document proving how they manipulated me, tried to destroy Amanda, and used the competition as a front for fraud. The last slide, a live feed of the criminal complaint I had just filed with the Department of Justice. The room went silent, reporters froze. Madison, watching from her phone in the back, dropped it, but I wasn't done. I looked straight into the cameras and said, "This isn't revenge. This is a rebuild. And I'm just getting started." And then, a familiar voice rang out from the crowd. "Cold. Calculated. Dangerous, Grace, I think you've forgotten something, you don't own the company yet." It was Madison, holding a document like a loaded weapon. "This is a shareholder override clause Grandpa signed 2 years ago. If there's a scandal, ownership reverts to the family trust, unless every board member votes to keep you." The crowd froze. Cameras zoomed in. My stomach sank, but I didn't flinch. I stepped forward and said, "You're right. But yesterday, Grandpa signed a new amendment, giving me 40% of the trust's voting power. I'm not just the CEO now, Madison. I am the trust." Her face went pale, and the room exploded in applause, because while Madison played dirty, I had played smart. I had spent the last 48 hours rebuilding my position legally. I had lawyers, whistleblower protection, signed board votes from allies who no longer wanted to drown with the old regime. They were done covering for corruption. And they backed me. Publicly, Madison tried to recover, but it was over. The scandal she tried to create had only spotlighted her desperation. Within 24 hours, her accounts were frozen. Uncle Thomas was subpoenaed. My mother left the city. And Grandpa, he quietly stepped down from every board he served on. As for me, I didn't just survive. I transformed. The same girl who was mocked for being too emotional, too soft, too retail level, now ran a multi-million-dollar company, with a clean board, investor trust, and a public that saw her not just as a CEO, but as a fighter. But the real win wasn't the title. It was walking into that office, sitting at the head of the table, and knowing that I didn't have to become like them to win. I used my scars as armor, not shame, and just before I ended my first official board meeting, I said one final thing: "Let this company be a place where no one ever has to fight in silence again." And they all stood up, even Grandpa.